So today's video comes with a pretty strong trigger warning. Today I'm going to be talking in a very general sense about my many suicide attempts. I'm often asked how I know that I developed post-traumatic stress disorder at such a young age. And the answer to that is that every mental health care professional that I've spoken to, every mental health care professional that has been over my case, every textbook that I've read on psychology specifically, or that's dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, childhood stress disorders, depression, anxiety, suicide attempts in children, those books specifically have indicated that suicide attempts are very rare among children. Really young children just don't typically attempt suicide. And if they do, they generally come from very damaging backgrounds. So, fair warning, trigger warning, this is going to be about suicide. So, the very first time that I tried to commit suicide, I was only 8 years old. I don't have a lot of memories that are coherent from before that age, which is abnormal. But when I was 8 years old, I went to live with my father. I had stayed with him before, but this was the first time that he ever actually had custody. At the time, he was married to a woman. She was his second wife. She was my first stepmother. Although my dad had girlfriends before that had lived with us, or that we had lived with. But this was the first time he actually, was married to one. And my mother had kidnapped us, and my father found us. And although technically it wasn't kidnapping, but for all intents and purposes, it was kidnapping. So anyway, while we were gone, while we were missing, my father had bought a house. And so when we went to live with him again, it was in a house. I'd never, I can't remember living in a house before. They had owned a house when they were married, but that was a long time ago. Anyway, so when I first got there, I was very uncomfortable. I had always grown up, I'd always been in cities, and now I was in this very rural area. I didn't fit in with my classmates at all. My, best friends that I was so excited to see again, we didn't live near anymore. My entire world had changed. On top of this, while I was with my first mother, she had allowed her boyfriend, one in particular, the man that she lived with, to molest me. And even though part of me realized that living with my dad meant that this man couldn't get to me anymore, I also knew on some level, even at 8 years old, that it probably meant that, my mom wouldn't be in my life anymore. Looking back, I know that she was a bad influence. Looking back, I know that the things that she did to me and put me through were wrong. But to an 8-year-old girl, I was happy to not have him touching me anymore, but I was really sad to not have my mom anymore. Although my mom had only really been there in the barest of senses anyway. So, dealing with my conflicting emotions about the loss of my mother dealing with my conflicting emotions about my father's wife, dealing with the fact that I'd, been molested. It was a lot. It was a lot. And so I remember trying to talk to someone about it. Like, I tried to talk to my dad about the things that had happened in Kentucky, which is where she ran off with us too. She took us to Kentucky when she kidnapped us. And, my dad didn't really want to hear it, probably because his father, technically his adopted father, but his father, my grandfather's pops, was, he molested his daughters. And so I think that my dad just didn't know how to deal with it. But regardless, he didn't deal with it well. Neither did my stepmother. So I was dealing with all of that, like, felt very dirty. And at 8 years old, I didn't really understand why. So, and no one would really talk to me about it. I didn't have any, therapy. I wasn't comfortable with my teachers. I wasn't comfortable with any of my classmates. I didn't really know how to verbalize the things that were going through my mind. All I knew is that, somehow I was to blame for this. And, not only was I to blame for the fact that he molested me, but I was to blame for the loss of my mother. I was to blame for the fact that my father had moved us out of what was essentially, the white trash neighborhood in the city that we lived in before to this rural community, which means that I was to blame for the loss of my friends who still lived in, that city. There's a lot. There's a lot for an 8-year-old girl to deal with, and I couldn't. And, at the time, I was a Christian. I still believed in a higher power that would protect me. I believed in, to say just, still believe in Santa Claus. But anyway, I don't know exactly what tipped the scales, but, I was very unhappy. All of the huge things that I was dealing with, had no friends, wasn't liked at school, and maybe I wouldn't have tried to commit suicide had, I had friends. Had I not gone from the situation in Kentucky to this place where I felt completely out of place. I don't know. I don't know what would have had to have happened to, get me to not go down that path. But I basically thought to myself that my life sucked and wasn't going to get better. And I'm always going to have this, stigma on me of what happened to me in Kentucky of being molested. And I was never going to have any friends, and I was never going to have anybody who loved me enough to listen to me. Because most kids don't talk about it. And I desperately wanted to tell someone to kind of, I don't know, I thought it would make me feel better. And maybe it would have. We'll never know. But my dad at the time had, guns. He had hunting rifles or shotguns or whatever. I'm not a gun aficionado, so I do not know exactly what kind of guns he had. But I remember going into his bedroom and shutting the door and taking one of his guns down from his gun rack, and because his guns were not locked, and the ammunition was not locked, and I think it was a shotgun because it just had the one thing. But anyway, so I put the gun on the floor, the butt of the gun on the floor, and put the barrel of it in my mouth. And if I had been taller, I wouldn't be here right now because my finger couldn't reach the trigger. So I tried to use my toe. And it didn't work. Like I couldn't, quite stretch far enough. To get that to work. That's how small I was. Like I couldn't use my toe to, push back the trigger to commit suicide. And that was the first time that I tried to commit suicide. And it still makes me sad to think about, and it's almost like it's something that didn't even happen to me. It's almost like I'm mourning for, some other little girl instead of the little girl that I was. But, it is what it is. And that happened. And, that was, my life at 8 years old was let's end it all. And that was the first time. Definitely wasn't the last time. Over the course of the next 20 years, I would repeatedly try. Most of those times I was serious. Most of those times I really wanted to die. Some of those times, and I will be honest, and before I say this, I think that you should always take a suicide attempt seriously. I think that anytime someone says they're suicidal, you should take that seriously, because if you're wrong, that person could die. And if you don't take it seriously and they were serious, then that person could die. However, there were times when it was sort of a test. Do you love me enough to stop me? Test. I don't believe that you love me. So let's see. Kind of test. Sadly to say, that test has been failed more often than it has been passed. And it was not a fair test to give. It was not a fair test to give. And I do feel bad for putting, a lot of people through hell. But it's kind of, devastating to someone who at times really wants to die to realize that there are those that would look her dead in the eye and say, okay, kill yourself. I don't care. Hard. Anyway, so I'm going to keep this short today. Mostly because thinking of me at 8 kind of fucks me up more than I want to admit. I don't want to admit it, but it totally fucks me up. I don't think about those days a lot. But the positive end to this is that it does get better. I'm not suicidal anymore. I don't want to die. When I start to feel that way again, I use therapy techniques that I've learned in therapy. Talk to my husband about it. I talk to my friends about it. Sometimes just like taking one of my dogs and just hugging the dog makes me feel a lot better. Because in dogs, we find unconditional love. Goober, Willis, and Pond love me, regardless. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm such an animal person, because pets will love you regardless. So, that's it. Sorry this one was such a huge downer, but I know what this is for, right? So I will see you tomorrow.